All right. So, purely by accident, so I listened to some of the YouTube uh what do we call it? What are we? Some of my fellow YouTubers videos in the community. Generally it's peers, colleagues, individuals that I'm friends with or that I play with or that I share privately with, etc. I'm subbed up to and I'll listen to those. But every once in a while in my feed will show up a video that it'll catch my eye, or it's somebody that I truly like or respect. And of course, but I just don't have time to listen to everything that people produce. So I'm very selective. And so very often Dell will link me something and say, hey, have you seen this? So it's mostly just time, right? How much time I have in the day to do the thing. But I happen to see popped up in my feed Runehammer's do mechanics matter, right? Or do your mechanics matter or something like that. It's a podcast. It's called I think it's called RPG Mainframe. I think is the name of the podcast. Runehammer for I think we all know Runehammer, right? The author, artist, GM, etc. of Index Card RPG, which to me is a was a master stroke during the days of fourth edition head scratch, Pathfinder head scratch, comes the birth of this thing called Index Card RPG, which liberated it. To be honest, it's somewhat of an inspiration to my process of getting away from um, these compartmentalized rules, right? Um, but it's the D20 simple D20 formula for those that said this is we don't need all this nonsense. Let's simplify this. And so there's no doubt that again this led to my interest in single one page RPGs. This led to my interest in wait a minute, what do we need? What don't we need? What are we trying to do in this thing called role playing? What am I trying to do for my players? What am I trying to do as a GM? I want to have fun again. I want to liberate myself to describe and be big, and I want to liberate my players to do the same. And but I want the rule. I want there to be some governing mechanic that so we're not playing cops and robbers, right? So it's not just I say this and the GM says, no, you don't. Yes, I do. No, you don't. I don't want cops and robbers, and I don't want writers' room where we all agree that's really cool and that's the story, you know. And I don't want to govern. I don't want to, So anyway, the point is, I'm getting way off track here. Get back to my point. It's a great listen. It's 45 minutes. I think he nails it. And of course, our game falls into his first example, right? Of how we can do this thing and why don't we just do it this way? That's kind of his first example. And then he has two other examples, which again, listen, I don't want to go, I'm not going to break down his take. But it made me think too about what happened, as a kid, what did I do? Like, how did I end up playing a bastardized version of basic Dungeons and Dragons for 18 years? How did I end up playing my version of D&D that I provided for my friends for years and years and years and years, including coming back as an adult and choosing basic fantasy or some OSR that I recognized so I could do it. And then ultimately I did what the hell I wanted to do, which was simplified, removed mechanics that did not matter, or mechanics that got in my way, or mechanics that just never seemed to me to be relevant to what I was trying to do or trying to place. And then, of course, playing other games that said, let's try this thing as the author intended. I reached out and I tried Ubiquity, and I reached out and tried Star Wars NDS, and I reached out and I tried, I'm trying to think of the other systems, 2D20 Conan, 2D20 Star Trek, Traveler, the original Traveler, or Mongoose Traveler, excuse me, with a group of friends that said, hey, what if we look at these rule sets? What if we look at these mechanics and we attempt to actually do what the design intent of the game is? That does not mean that these games are meant to be listened to. All right. These aren't spectator games necessarily, right? These aren't what I would call, I've said this before, role playing is not a spectator sport. You're supposed to be involved, right? You're supposed to get inspired by something you've read. You're supposed to get inspired by something you've seen. And then you're supposed to go out there and grab books and invite friends and strangers to do this thing, right? Um, Reading is a private matter, right? And but role playing is not. Role playing is a social event, right? It's how us antisocial, kind of bashful, quiet, selective people, you know, enjoyed a wider variety of social activities. For me, I was I was the kind of guy, still am. I handpicked and I was very careful and handpicked friends, people who liked and respected. They liked and respected me, and they became close friends, and we grew up together. And but for the most part, it helped me not be so bashful, et cetera, et cetera, and it helped me express my creative and imaginative side as a kid, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it was entertainment that wasn't sitting around watching TV or trying to flip through comic books with your buddy, sharing a comic book flip through. That's passive stuff. I wanted active stuff, right? And role playing is this active thing, right? And again, when you're a kid, you don't even know why the hell it inspires. You don't know why the hell you want to do this. I wasn't scrutinizing it, you know. And as I aged, I didn't. I just said, "You guys want to play some D&D?" And we crack out the dice, and we roll some dice, we have some laughs, and we move on, right? So anyway, only when I grew up and I matured and I began to say, "Huh, there's a reason they write these books with mechanics to do a certain thing. If I ignore them, I'm getting the exact same experience no matter what game I choose." And this is the problem I'm seeing with something like, which is why everybody who buys an OSR ends up having the exact same experience, because the reality is they're running the same game. Even if I play Dragon Slayer, am I going to run Dragon Slayer, or am I going to say, "Wow, this reminds me of the game I always ran," and I just run the game I've always ran? And that's easy to do because it is an OSR of the D20 experience. It's already going to feel very similar, right? I mean, let's face it. What's the difference between Labyrinth Lord and Sword and Wizardry? Not much. What's the difference between OSE and Labyrinth Lord? Not much. They're subtle details. Like you do roll the D8 for Wandering Monsters. You might roll the D12 in some game for Wandering Monsters, right? So, hacks were a greater change in the D20 formula. A hack that just flat said, "We're not counting arrows, we're not counting torches, we're not going to keep track of time. Screw that shit. It's a pain in the ass and it's meaningless. Let's hack it. Let's make it interesting." But when it becomes a random variable, sometimes that's less interesting. It can be funny, it can be entertaining, but I don't know if it's interesting, right? And these are fascinating ideas, especially when it comes to somebody who breaks down games, tears down games, reads games, gives them their due diligence, and attempts to play them as the authors intended. And it always cracks me up when people say, "Dude, no one ever played D&D that way." Gary Gygax didn't mean that. Then he shouldn't have canonized it in a fucking rule book. If Gary didn't play that way and Gary didn't think that way, then why the fuck did he put it in a rule book? And this is a fact. I don't intend on people should play a game wrong. And I don't think most people ever did or ever will, because it's hard. It's very hard. And again, as Runehammer points out, and you scratch your head and say, "But what are we really trying to do here? Why?" If I have to look up how a thrown grenade bounces on a chart, and because it happens so rarely that the vial of arrow, I'll never forget this. We had a great basic fantasy, and I'll give you an example, an actual example. We had that great basic fantasy campaign going with Josh and Lee and Mark and amazing. We had this battle in I think it was in a tavern, and Josh threw a vial of oil, right? And it was like, well, he missed. So, but where does it go? Because the thing is he wants it to hit somewhere. And of course, basic fantasy had a chart for how that, you roll a 1d8 and it tells you where the thing bounces around the target. We could have figured that out. We could have invented something, or we could have said, "Dude, you missed the target. It cracked. Oh, you were on the right. It literally, if you throw it, it's going to go over his head and land on the left side of the target, right?" But that chart was fun, and it was cool to see where this thing bounced, because it took it out of our hands and it made it interesting. Did it land kind of where he wants it, or did it land completely jacking up his strategy? That was fun. It's a mechanic that you didn't need. It's a mechanic that I actually had to look up because I didn't know the chart. I didn't have the chart memorized, but you wanted to use it because it implied something outside of my condition, right? I didn't have a problem with that, and it was great fun. But do we need it? Was it a mechanic that's necessary? No, obviously not. Right? So I've said before, when I read a rule book and like 2D20, and it's for me to and I say 2D20 because I'll be honest, outside of my look at Starfinder and my look at Pathfinder. I mean, I've run some Pathfinder, ran some Starfinder, mostly to get the experience, which I knew I wouldn't like. So it was really a waste of time. And sure enough, it basically confirmed my attitude about the rules, although I enjoyed the shit out of Starfinder. Starfinder inspired me as a GM to do some things I'd never done in a game, right? Like use the economy of the game. They literally had to have the money to get the ship to do their mission. Well, they had to go to a bank and they had to negotiate a loan because they didn't have the money. They were starting characters. And we ended up with an amazing thing that I would have never in a million years thought would be fun, but they enjoyed that. They knew they had a week to get the job done, get paid, and pay off their loan, right? It became but they had this grand hunt the dinosaurs session, but they were on a timetable. I mean, it created a time mechanism. It created something I would have never, ever done, but had nothing to do with the Starfinder rules, except that Starfinder, everything had a price and everything was expensive. And they are starting characters that don't have these things. And I didn't want them to be just doing some crap ass level 1 first BS adventure for their 150 credits. Right. I wanted to allow them to reach out, and they wanted to do more. So to do that, they needed to get money. But to get money, they had to negotiate and they had to get a loan. And then there was a window on it. They had to borrow the ship. They had to pay for the ship. And if the ship got destroyed or damaged, they would have been in Hawk. And right. All that stuff came from them being creative. And because there was an economy in Starfinder, it became this it created a mechanic that they could buy into. But I would have never played Starfinder going, can't wait to introduce money. It's a worthless mechanic unless you give it value. They gave it value by saying, can we just, hey, could we rent a ship? Could we rent some gear? Why the hell not? Why can't you? But there's going to be some risk reward here, right? You got to be done in so much time. You got to bring back the ship in working order. You better catch some dinosaurs so you can sell them, whatever the hell we were doing, right? Okay. But when it comes to declaring an action and deciding the result, risk reward, pass, fail, ranges of success, yes and yes but, they all work depending on what kind of desired effect you want. And I want players doing exactly as Roomhammer narrates. You grab the wheel of the ship and you drive it, and you're trying to steer the ship out of the shallows, away from the rocks, which will sunder your ship, and you will be floundering, right? Describe that, how you wrench that wheel. And now it's simple. Dude, this is hard, man. You guys are looking at a DC 17, and you got to, add your strength bonus, make that roll to crank that wheel. If you don't, right, there's going to be risk reward here, right? Simple. And they're in it, and they're in it live. And that's why we wrote Dark Age of Man. That's why we designed Dark Age of Man in a particular way. That's why we wrote Dark Age of Man in a particular way. The mechanics all matter. And by the way, they matter from the beginning of the book to the very end of the book. Everything in the book matters. It all ties together to make this experience. It doesn't limit who you can be and what you can achieve in the dark ages of our fictional world. It doesn't limit who you can be and how you can express your character and yourself. But the rules govern simply everything, and all the attributes matter, and all of the reasons you would need to check an attribute matters. Something like repute matters, and something as simple as how you earn repute matters. Prestige matters. You're not going to get counsel with the king with a 0 prestige. You might not get counsel with the king with a 1 prestige, right? But with a 0 or a -1, you're not ever going to get counsel with the Lord or the king, ever. You will be brought before the Lord or the king when you are in trouble or when you are a witness to something. Outside of that, you will never get audience with the Lord or the king, right? And so those things matter. And unless people ignore those rules and hand wave them away and don't pay attention to the 0 prestige peasant, and they allow them to knock on the door of the Lord and say, hey, Lord, hey, listen, I was up north and I think I saw some poachers, and I was thinking maybe I could take care of that for you, right? Not going to happen unless you just ignore prestige. So ignoring mechanics is what ultimately matters, right? Pretending they don't mean something is ultimately when we find out that players are really doing what the fuck they want to do, right? GMs are running the thing just the way they want to do it. Players are engaging the rules, hoping to get what the book says, and the GM blows that shit off, right? For me, what makes a bad GM is the guy who doesn't abide by a rule that the players anticipate, right? I made this character randomly. I rolled him up 3 dice 6 straight down, completely random, right? And he has a 1 to 3 listen at doors. And I'm listening at the door, and I expect a 50% chance on that D6 to hear something. And the GM arbitrarily says, just roll under your wisdom. Or the GM arbitrarily says, yeah, you can hear it. Or the GM arbitrarily says, nah, you can't hear anything. Or the GM arbitrarily says, let's make a percentile roll. It's about a 20% chance you can hear something. And everybody at the table who knows the rules goes, all right. So I preface this video, all role-playing is communication, right? It's first and foremost communication. How do I deliver a thing? How do they deliver a thing back? And then how do we arbitrate any differences or any conflicts, right? And we're going to arbitrate those generally, right, by rule. If I deliver a game of Moldvay D&D and I present the game best I can within the abilities of the confined rules, which again makes people cringe. Rules is written. Forget rules is written. I just use what D&D Moldvay is. It's a dungeon crawl simulator. We all know that. We all agree on that, right? And because of that, they come with tools, they come with resources, and they come with the want to have that experience. And if I don't give it to them, they go, why the hell are we playing this game? I don't need a 10-foot pole then. I don't need arrows. So let's play white hat. Let's play black hat. Let's play index card RPG. Let's play something else. And there is the gist of my argument. Play what you are playing, good or ill. Mechanics matter when you decide to give them their due, when you pay attention to them. Now, his podcast is referring to Jeremy Crawford running their new system for Wizards of the Coast. And quite honestly, they're not using the rules. Why? I don't know, because it would be a boring ass thing to watch if he actually used the rules. If Crawford actually played the thing like they anticipate you're going to read it and share it in the basement with your friends, right? I don't like that kind of gaming. Runehammer clearly doesn't like that kind of gaming. So this is why we don't play, AD&D 2E and AD&D 3 and Pathfinder. This is why we ended up, finding ourselves saying, wait a minute, this could be much, much more amazing, and we can simplify much of this. But the mechanics still matter. Index card RPG, to me, the mechanics still matter. Now, much of the mechanics are left for us to quickly assimilate into our culture of play, and that is a bonus, right? Because I can't really break the system. I can't break Index Card RPG. I can't break Dark Age of Man. I can ignore things about Dark Age of Man, and it's not going to be, you're not going to feel like an authentic peasant if I do. And you're not going to feel like a lord if I ignore your 4 prestige when you are a lord and you can command the peasants in your fiefdom, right? Hey, I want you guys to get your stuff together, and I want you to go out and look for these bandits. I mean, you can give orders to your peasants, right? And so those things become part of the atmosphere of Dark Age of Man, right? So, but you're informed by a mechanical device called prestige and what that means. So I'm torn here because I respect complicated games, and I'm not saying Runehammer doesn't. Obviously he does. But I get what he's saying. If you're going to run your system, run it. And if it's too complicated or boring for your video expression of the rules, then it's bullshit. You guys are lying. They're liars, right? They're just doing what looks fun and interesting. Has nothing to do with the thing they're selling. And that is disingenuous. That is false advertising. That's what I would call it. It's false advertising. And if Jeremy Crawford doesn't even play his own game the way he claims, the way the book teaches or claims the thing to do, then I have to say they are all about selling they're all about pimping their wares, which the kid gets home, flips through it, and goes, huh. And then they sit down with their friends, and their friends are doing things that wasn't happening in Jeremy Crawford's video with those really cool actors. No, because they're following the rules and they're going, hey, we expect you to do this. And for me to do this, I got to do all these machinations of shit that I don't want to do. And nobody ends up having that Jeremy Crawford experience. It seems to me it's about what sells books, not about what's in the books they're selling. And I've said this before. Wizards of the Coast lost me. TSR lost me at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2, right? They technically lost me at AD&D 1, but I borrowed ideas from AD&D 1 for my bastardized version of Basic Expert that were cool. Literally because they were cool or because my players, my friends, the people that I respected around the table said, this is cool. I'd like to be this. I'd like to play an assassin. And I wasn't going to say, screw you, Jeff. You can't play an assassin. So I said, sure, man, make an assassin. And so he could do some assassin-y stuff because it inspired him. And I'll be damned if I'm going to crush his inspiration, right? There's more to game design. As game designers, we're going to see games differently, and we're going to see them psychologically, I think, differently than players, as opposed to consumers who buy a book, especially if they have no experience. They buy a book, they're going to trust this book is going to teach them how to do a thing. It's going to teach them how to be a commander of a table of individuals who come here to do a thing that they've also read. And let's face it, it's daunting, especially if you choose one of those games. And it's going to be daunting because they're going to come back and people are going to say to him, dude, I watched Critical Role last night. That was so fun. They're having so much fun. Why aren't we having that kind of fun? As if they are not responsible for their own level of engagement, right? I have literally been at a fifth edition table where everybody there talked about Critical Role and they all thought they were Critical Role. They wanted to be Critical Role, but none of them were even qualified because Critical Role is actors. It's not what really happens at their tables using their books. I watched I write, develop, play our game. I invited other people to run our game. We have put those APs up. We have watched now friends that had nothing to do with our playtest, nothing to do really with us as far as playing in the game or running a game for them. I have watched 2 watch-alongs, 2 videos of them enjoying exactly what Dark Age of Man is. And I'm proud of the fact that this little 90-page rule book achieve that for them. And with due diligence, they bothered to pay attention to the mechanics. They bothered to use the mechanics. And whether they like the mechanics or not, the mechanics informed their play. The mechanics informed their experience. The mechanics actually made it worth their time. Could they do simpler? Sure. Could they do more complicated and get a different experience? Yes. This is all about experience. And the problem with WotC is their videos are selling a lie. That's not how the game functions. It's not how most people play, and it's not how GMs run the games. And if they do, they're probably more fun. If the guys who buy the 5e books kind of throw all that crap out, they're probably having more fun, right? They're probably having more fun. And then I would say to them, you don't need D&D. Get Index Card RPG, get Blood and Bone, get White Hat, get Black Hat, right? Get basic fantasy, get something completely different, get Dark Age of Man, right? Get Astonishing Interplanetary Adventures, get In Darkest Warrens, and you'll be liberated from worrying about how a thing happens in the game. You'll be more worried about being your character and more worried about your character expressing himself and expressing what he's trying to do. And there will be a device that very simply dictates whether we're moving forward with this thing or we're stuck in this thing or we are processed forward. And you won't be bored and you'll engage your character and you'll engage each other and you'll engage the fiction at a much higher, as I've said, it's more sophisticated play with less sophisticated gaming. Less sophisticated rules, oddly enough, lead to more sophisticated play, right? And can oddly enough lead to more complicated situations, right? Because the rules aren't governing how vast the results of players engaging in a fiction can get, right? Starfinder, the best experience we had with Starfinder was the fact that it had an economic system that inspired them and me. The rules be damned. The rules actually were, it was Pathfinder in space, right? It was, we still have to do all this bull rush. We have to do the feats and all the bullshit, right? And when it came down to the grind of the combat with the dinosaurs, that was a grind. It was less fun. It was the economic model of Starfinder that inspired us. We found joy in the thing that had really it's a hand wave for Starfinder, right? We created that, and we create all of our fun generally anyway. But so it's fascinating. It's a great listen because I think he's spot on. And again, Runehammer's coming from the place of a veteran GM, but also a game designer, someone who's thinking about what's the psychology. What is this going to create at the table? Is this going to create fun? Is this going to create boredom? Is this meaningful? But the gist of this video, one final piece that I wanted to say, with all that being said, Todd running OSC for us on last Wednesday night, using open doors, using the time sequence for torches burning out, lanterns burning out, eating and resting, changed the experience. And there was a level of tension, there was a level of dread, and there was a level that this stuff matters. It matters now that I only have 2 torches. It matters that I only got 7 days ration. And believe it or not, it heightened the experience because the game was designed and intended for a different experience. It's not just intended for telling high tales of ocean, of steering the ship away from the rocks. And therefore, we had an experience which may not be ideal for most people and may not be ideal for every session we're ever in, but it really was worth having. And it was a heightened experience because these things did matter. The mechanics mattered, which is what Runehammer's saying. Do they matter? Are you using them? Do they matter? What's the intention of them? What are we getting out of them? And he is 100% right. And the fact that Jeremy Crawford can run that session and ignore them or not even pay attention to them tells me they're selling you a lie, which I've always known. So anyway, I had to and I'll put a link to that podcast because he nails it. I think he does a lot of podcasts that are probably very informational. I only have seen a handful, but every time I have, they have been enlightening. So